The boat drifts dead in black water. 4 men stare at the same spot where the surface moves in slow circles. Something rises. A head too flat, too wide, covered in something that glistens. It stands waist deep, watching. Then it glides toward them without displacing the water. The screams are short. When the engine finally catches, the seats are empty. Whatever took them left no trace. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. In the summer of 1973, my uncle Harlan took a job running airboat tours through the Everglades out of a dock near Chokoloskee. He was 42 years old, built like a fence post, and had spent most of his life on the water in one form or another, shrimping off the Gulf, guiding fishermen through the 10,000 islands, hauling cargo nobody asked questions about. He knew those swamps better than most men knew their own front yards. He told me once that the Everglades held secrets older than memory, and that a smart man learned which channels to avoid after dark. I thought he was trying to scare me. I was 17 that summer, staying with him because my mother had taken ill and my father needed help I could not give. Harlan put me to work, fueling boats, cleaning gear, and listening to the stories that tourists told when they came back from the water. Most of those stories were nothing. Alligators that looked bigger than they were, birds that startled them, the occasional snake draped across a low branch. But every few weeks, someone came back different, quiet, shaken in a way that had nothing to do with wildlife. They would sit on the dock and stare at the water and say very little. Harlan never pressed them. He would pour them a drink from the bottle he kept under the register and let them sit until they were ready to leave. He never asked what they saw. He never told them they were wrong. So before we continue, please make sure you leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The first time I understood that the swamp held something wrong was in late June. A man named Delacroix had come down from Baton Rouge to fish. He was loud, confident, and carried more gear than he knew how to use. He hired Harlan to take him deep into the backcountry, where the base ran thick and the water turned black beneath the sawgrass. They left before dawn. I watched the airboat disappear into the mist, the engine fading until the swamp swallowed the sound whole. They were supposed to return by noon. Noon passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. By 3, I was standing at the end of the dock, watching the channel where they should have appeared. The other guides had come and gone. The tourists had packed their coolers and driven away. The heat pressed down like a hand, and the insects sang in waves that rose and fell without rhythm. At 4:15, the airboat appeared at the edge of the visible water. It moved slow. Too slow, drifting more than driving. I ran to the end of the dock and waved, but neither man waved back. When the boat reached the dock, I saw why. Delacroix sat in the passenger seat with his hands gripping the frame so hard his knuckles had gone white. His face had no color. His eyes were fixed on something that was not in front of him. Harlan killed the engine and stepped off without speaking. He tied the line to the cleat and then walked past me toward the shed. I followed him with my eyes, then looked back at Delacroix. The man had not moved. I said his name twice before he blinked. When he turned his head toward me, the movement was slow and mechanical, like his neck had forgotten how to work. He said one word, stood. Then he climbed off the boat and walked to his truck and drove away. He left all his gear behind, $200 worth of rods and tackle and a cooler full of bait. He never came back for any of it. I found Harlan in the shed, sitting on an overturned bucket with a cigarette burning between his fingers. He did not look up when I came in. I asked him what happened out there. He took a long drag and let the smoke curl out of his nose before he answered. He said they had gone deep, past the marked channels, into a stretch of water he usually avoided. Delacroix had insisted The man wanted trophy base and would not settle for anything less. They pushed through the sawgrass into a clearing where the water went still and the air turned thick. The birds were gone. The insects were gone. The only sound was the slow drip of water off the grass and the faint creak of the boat settling. Harlan said he felt watched, not by an animal, not by another person, watched by something that had weight to it, something that pressed against his skin like humidity, but colder. Delacroix felt it too. The man stopped talking mid-sentence and turned in his seat and stared at the tree line, where a cluster of cypress rose out of the black water. Harlan followed his gaze. That was when they saw it. He described it in fragments, the way a man describes a car accident or a fire. Tall, taller than a man by 2 feet at least, covered in something that was not fur and not moss, but somewhere between. It stood in the shallows near the cypress roots with water up to its knees. Its arms hung long, past its hips, and ended in hands that were too wide. The head sat forward on the neck at an angle that did not look natural. And the eyes. Harlan paused when he got to the eyes. He said they caught the light wrong. They reflected like an animal's eyes, but held steady like a man's. They did not blink. They watched the boat without moving. Harlan did not reach for the rifle he kept under the seat. He did not start the engine. He sat frozen, the same way Delacroix sat frozen, both of them pinned by something they could not name. The creature did not move either. It stood in the water and watched them for what felt like minutes, but was probably seconds. Then it turned its head, slow and deliberate, and walked deeper into the cypress. It did not splash. It did not rush. It moved like something that had nowhere to go and all the time in the world to get there. When it disappeared into the trees, the sound came back. Insects, birds, the small noises of the swamp filling the space it had left behind. Harlan started the engine and they came back. Neither man spoke during the entire trip. I asked Harlan what it was. He shook his head and said he did not know. He had heard stories from the old-timers, from the Mikosuke guides who worked the interior, from fishermen who had been coming to these waters for 50 years. They called it different things. The swamp ape, the skunk ape. Some of them just called it the thing in the grass. Harlan said the names did not matter. What mattered was that it was real, and it lived out there in the places where men did not go, and sometimes it let itself be seen. He told me not to talk about it. Not to the tourists, not to the other guides, not to anyone. He said people who talked about it too much had a way of running into it again, and the second time was never as peaceful as the first. I did not understand what he meant by that. I would learn. The summer stretched on and the days blurred into heat and work, and the slow rhythm of the water. I stopped thinking about what Harlan had described. It was easy to let it fade when the sun was high, and the dock was crowded, and the sound of engines filled the air. The swamp felt ordinary again, dangerous in the usual ways. Alligators that needed watching, water moccasins coiled on low branches, the occasional storm that came up fast and turned the channels into chaos. These were threats I understood. They fit into a world that made sense. I told myself that whatever Harlan and Delacroix had seen was a trick of light, or a bear standing wrong, or something their minds had built from fear and shadow. I almost believed it. In August, a family from Ohio came through. Parents in their 40s, 2 kids around 12 and 14. They wanted the full experience. They wanted to see alligators and birds, and maybe a manatee if they were lucky. Harlan was booked, so one of the other guides, a man named Polk, took them out. Polk was younger than Harlan, maybe 35, but he had grown up on the water and knew the safe routes as well as anyone. He took them on a 3-hour loop through the popular channels where the wildlife was thick and the views were good. They came back on time. The kids were excited, chattering about the gators they had seen. The parents were tired but smiling. Everything looked normal. I helped them unload and watched them drive away. Polk tied up the boat and walked past me without a word. His face had that same look Delacroix had worn 2 months before. Pale, tight, staring at something that was not there. I found him later, sitting behind the bait shop with a beer. He was not drinking. I asked him what happened. He shook his head at first. The way men do when they are deciding whether to trust you with something heavy. Then he told me. They had taken the main channel out past the bird sanctuary, looped through the mangrove tunnels, and were heading back when the boy asked to stop. The kid had seen something in the water, a shape he thought was a manatee. Polk cut the engine and let the boat drift toward the spot. The water there was shallow, maybe 3 feet, clear enough to see the bottom if you looked hard. The shape was not a manatee. It was too long and too thin, stretched out on the bottom like something waiting. Polk thought it was a log at first, waterlogged and dark. Then it moved. Not the way a fish moves or an alligator moves. It shifted along the bottom in a slow crawl, using limbs that bent in too many places. It moved toward the boat. Polk started the engine and got them out of there before the family could see what was happening. He told them it was just a gator on the bottom. Nothing to worry about. The parents believed him. The kids believed him. But Polk had seen the shape more clearly as the boat pulled away. He said it had risen slightly off the bottom, lifted its head toward the surface, and watched them go. The head was wrong. Too flat, too wide. The eyes were set on the sides like a fish, but tracked forward like a predator. He did not know what it was. He only knew it was not supposed to exist. I told Harlan what Polk had seen. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, he nodded once and said nothing for a long time. Then he told me something I have never forgotten. He said the swamp was old. Older than the state, older than the country, older than the people who had named it and mapped it and tried to tame it. He said things lived in that water that had been there since before memory. Most of them stayed hidden. Most of them wanted nothing to do with people. But sometimes the lines blurred. Sometimes the old things moved closer to the places where men went. And when that happened, you did not fight them. You did not chase them. You left them alone and hoped they returned the favor. He told me there were places in the interior that the Mekoski would not go, places where the water turned black and the air went still and the land itself felt wrong. He had seen some of those places. He had learned to recognize the signs, the absence of birds, the way the sawgrass leaned away from certain clearings, the smell that came up sometimes, thick and sour, like something rotting, but alive. He said smart men paid attention to those signs. Fools ignored them. And some men went looking for what made them, and those men did not come back whole. September came, and the tourist season began to slow. The heat broke just enough to make the afternoons bearable. I spent more time on the water, helping with runs, when the other guides were busy, learning the channels and the shortcuts, and the places where the big gators like to sun. I was careful. I watched for the signs Harlan had described. I avoided the dark stretches and the silent clearings and the water that felt too still. I told myself I was being smart. I told myself I was being safe, but part of me wanted to see what they had seen. Part of me needed to know if the stories were true, or if I had spent a summer believing in something that did not exist. That part of me would get what it wanted before the month was over. The night it happened started like any other. Harlan had taken a late booking, a group of 4 men from Jacksonville who wanted a sunset run through the islands. They paid cash and brought their own cooler and asked no questions about the route. Harlan liked clients like that. He took them out around 5 and expected to be back by 8. I stayed behind to close up the dock and lock the shed. The other guides had gone home. The lot was empty except for Harlan's truck and the van the Jacksonville men had arrived in. The sun dropped below the tree line, and the sky turned orange, and then purple, and then dark. The insects started their chorus. The water lapped against the pilings in a steady rhythm. I finished my work and sat on the end of the dock to wait. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 8:30. Then 9. I was not worried at first. Late returns happened. Engines failed. Channels got blocked. 100 small things could slow a boat down without meaning danger. But by 9:30, the dock felt too quiet. The insects had stopped singing. The water had gone flat and still. The air pressed close and carried a smell I recognized from Harlan's stories. Thick, sour, wrong. I stood up and looked out at the channel. The darkness was complete. No moon, no stars visible through the haze. The only light came from the single bulb over the dock and the faint glow of the shed behind me. I called out Harlan's name. My voice carried across the water and came back with nothing behind it. I called again. Silence. Then from somewhere out in the black, I heard the engine. It was distant at first, a low drone that grew louder by degrees. The airboat appeared at the edge of the light, moving fast, faster than it should have been moving in the dark. On water it could not see. It did not slow as it approached. It ran straight at the dock like Harlan meant to crash it. I scrambled back just before the bow hit the pilings. The impact threw me to the boards. Wood cracked. The engine died. I lay there for a moment, ears ringing, trying to understand what had just happened. Then I pulled myself up and looked at the boat. Harlan was alone. The 4 men from Jacksonville were gone. Their cooler was gone. Their gear was gone. Only Harlan sat in the pilot seat, hunched forward, hands still gripping the steering column. His face was cut in several places. His shirt was torn. His eyes were open, but saw nothing. I climbed down to the boat and touched his shoulder. He flinched like I had burned him. Then he turned his head and looked at me, and for a moment I did not recognize him. His eyes had gone wrong somehow. The pupils were too wide, the whites too visible. He looked at me like I was something he had never seen before. Then he blinked, and the man I knew came back, and his face crumpled into something I had never seen on him. Fear, pure and absolute and raw. He told me what happened in pieces over the next hour. I gave him whiskey and let him talk when he could. He said the run had gone fine at first. The Jacksonville men were easy clients. They drank and laughed and watched the sun set and did not cause trouble. Harlan took them through the standard route, out past the Bird Islands, around the mangrove keys, back through the main channel. They were 2 miles from the dock when the engine coughed and died. Harlan checked the fuel and the lines and could not find the problem. The boat drifted while he worked. The men grumbled but stayed patient. One of them made a joke about being stuck in the swamp overnight. They laughed. Then they stopped laughing. One by one, they went quiet. Harlan felt it before he saw anything. That weight in the air, that pressure against his skin. He looked up from the engine and saw the men staring at the water, all 4 of them frozen, staring at the same spot off the port side. The water there was moving, not rippling, not splashing, moving in a circle, slow and deliberate, like something underneath was swimming in a tight loop. The circle widened. The center of it rose. Something broke the surface. Harlan said it was not the same as what he had seen with Delacroix. It was worse. It came up head first, and the head was too big and too flat and covered in something that glistened. The body followed, shoulders and arms and a torso that kept rising until the thing stood waist deep in the water, not 10 feet from the boat. It was taller than any man. It was broader than any man, and it smelled like death, warmed by the sun. The Jacksonville men did not move. They sat in their seats and stared at it and did not make a sound. Harlan tried to restart the engine. His hands shook so badly he could barely grip the pull cord. The thing watched him. It watched all of them. Then it moved toward the boat. Not walking, not swimming, gliding through the water without displacing it, like the swamp was letting it pass. Harlan pulled the cord. The engine caught. He threw the throttle forward, and the boat lurched away. Behind him, he heard splashing. He heard one of the Jacksonville men scream, short and sharp and cut off. He did not look back. He kept his eyes forward and his hand on the throttle, and he ran for the dock as fast as the boat would go. When he finally looked over his shoulder, the seats were empty. The cooler was gone. The men were gone. The water behind him was flat and still, and gave no sign that anything had happened. I asked Harlan if we should call the police. He shook his head. He said there was nothing to call them about. No bodies, no evidence, no way to explain what had happened without sounding insane. The Jacksonville men had paid cash. They had not left names or numbers. Their van sat in the lot with no registration on the dash and no identification inside. They might as well have never existed. Harlan said we would push the van into the canal and let the water take it. He said we would not speak of this to anyone. He said the swamp had taken what it wanted, and we were lucky it had left us behind. I helped him push the van. I watched it sink. I did not sleep that night. The rest of that summer passed in silence. Harlan stopped taking late bookings. He stopped going into the backcountry. He ran the short routes, the safe routes, the channels where the water stayed clear and the wildlife stayed visible. He aged 10 years in those final weeks. His hands developed a tremor that never quite went away. His eyes stayed wrong. That wideness that came from seeing too much. When September ended and I had to go back home, he drove me to the bus station without speaking. At the curb, he grabbed my arm and held it tight. He told me not to come back. He told me the swamp had noticed me now, the same way it had noticed him. He said that once it noticed you, it never stopped watching. He said some places were not meant for people, and the Everglades was one of them. And the best thing I could do was forget everything I had seen and never think about it again. I promised him I would. I lied. I went back 15 years later. Harlan was dead by then, drowned in a channel he had run 1,000 times. They found his body but never found his boat. The dock where I had worked was gone, replaced by a marina with tourists who did not know the water's real name. But the swamp was the same. The sawgrass still leaned in the same directions. The channel still turned dark in the same places. I hired a guide, a young Miccosukee man who had grown up on the water the way Harlan had. I told him I wanted to see the places tourists did not go. He looked at me for a long moment, measuring something behind my eyes. Then he nodded and told me the price and told me we would leave at dawn. The guide's name was David. He was maybe 25, quiet and competent, with hands that knew the boat without looking. We launched before sunrise and pushed into the interior as the light turned gray and then gold. David did not talk much. I watched the water and the grass and waited for the signs I remembered. We passed through channels I recognized and channels I did not. We saw alligators sunning on mud banks. We saw herons standing still as statues in the shallows. We saw the ordinary wilderness, but I knew we had not gone far enough. I knew the real swamp lay deeper, past the routes the tourists took, past the markers the guides used. I asked David to take me further. He hesitated. He looked at me with that same measuring gaze from the night before. Then he turned the boat and pushed deeper into the grass. The change happened gradually. The birds thinned and then disappeared. The insects went quiet. The water turned darker, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. The sawgrass leaned away from certain clearings, the way Harlan had described. David slowed the boat and cut the engine. We drifted in silence. The air pressed close and carried that smell I remembered. I felt the weight of something watching. David felt it too. He sat rigid in his seat, hands flat on his knees. He whispered that we should go back. I told him not yet. I needed to see it. David shook his head, but did not restart the engine. We drifted further into the clearing. The water went still. The grass stopped moving. The world held its breath. And then I saw it. It stood at the edge of the cypress, half hidden by the roots, watching us the way a cat watches a mouse it has not decided to kill yet. It was exactly as Harlan had described. Tall, covered in something between fur and moss, arms too long, head too forward, and those eyes, those terrible patient eyes that reflected light and held judgment and did not blink. I stared at it. It stared at me. The moment stretched until time lost meaning. I felt something pass between us, some recognition that went deeper than thought. It knew me. It had always known me. The swamp had been watching me all along, waiting for me to come back. The creature did not move. It simply stood there, letting me look, letting me know that everything I had feared was real. Then it turned, slow and deliberate, and walked into the cypress. The water closed behind it. The sounds came back. The weight lifted. David started the engine without a word and took us back to the dock. At the marina, I paid him double what we had agreed and told him I was sorry for taking him out there. He looked at me for a long moment and then said something that has stayed with me ever since. He said his grandfather had seen the same thing 50 years ago. He said his grandfather had told him the same stories Harlan had told me. He said the swamp had always held things that did not belong to the world we knew, and the only way to live near them was to respect them and leave them alone. He said I was lucky to have looked and walked away. I left Florida that afternoon. I have not been back since, but the swamp has not left me. I dream of it still. Black water stretching endless, the weight of something watching. Some nights I wake convinced that I am still standing in that clearing, that David never started the engine, that the creature never walked away. The stories I have told you are true. The names are changed, the dates are shifted, but the events happened the way I described. Harlan saw what he saw. Polk saw what he saw. I saw what I saw. And somewhere in the Everglades tonight, something is standing in the shallows, watching the boats pass, waiting for the next person foolish enough to go looking for it. The swamp is patient. The swamp is old. And the swamp never forgets. I tell people now to stay on the marked channels. I tell them to listen to their guides. I tell them that if the birds go quiet and the water goes still and the air turns thick and sour, they should turn around and run and not look back. Most people laugh and ignore me. They do not understand that I am trying to save their lives. They do not understand that the things in the swamp do not care about our beliefs or our skepticism. They simply exist. They have always existed, and they will be there long after we are gone. The coastal waters are no safer. I learned that the hard way on a trip to the Gulf side, near Cedar Key, 3 years after my first visit to the Everglades. A friend of a friend had a fishing charter and offered me a spot on a night run for grouper. I should have known better. I should have remembered what Harlan told me about the water, knowing you, remembering you, calling you back. But I went anyway, because part of me still needed to understand, still needed to see more, still hoped that what I had witnessed was an exception rather than a rule. The Gulf taught me otherwise. We launched at dusk from a marina that smelled of diesel and baitfish. The boat was a 30-footer with twin outboards and enough lights to turn night into day. Our captain was a man named Reese, who had been running charters for 20 years. He knew the reefs and the wrecks and the places where the big fish gathered. He promised us a good night. We ran out past the oyster bars and the grass flats into the deeper water, where the Gulf turned dark blue and then black. The lights on the boat made a small island of brightness in an ocean of nothing. We dropped lines and waited. The fish came slow at first, then faster, then not at all. Reese frowned and checked his electronics and moved us to a different spot. Same thing. A few bites, then silence. He moved us again. Nothing. The other fisherman grumbled and opened more beers and made jokes about the one that got away. I watched the water and said nothing. Something felt wrong. The gulf was too quiet. The waves were too flat. The darkness beyond the lights was too complete. I had felt this before. I knew what it meant. Reese decided to try one more spot, a wreck site he had been saving for a last resort. He said the fish there were always hungry, but the currents were tricky. Tonight, he made an exception. We motored for 20 minutes until the electronics showed the wreck below us, a jumble of metal and wood that had been someone's boat 50 years ago. We dropped lines. The water around us went still. The engine idled, the lights hummed, and from somewhere beneath us something moved. I felt it first as a vibration through the hull, a low thrum that was not the engine and not the waves. The other fishermen felt it too. They looked at each other and at Reese and at the water. The thrum grew stronger. The boat began to rock, gently at first, then harder. Reese killed the engine and told everyone to hold on. The rocking stopped. The water went flat. Then the lights flickered. They had been running fine all night. Now they flickered and dimmed and flickered again. In the moments of darkness between flickers, I saw something in the water, beside the boat, a shape, long and dark and moving parallel to our hull. It was too big to be a fish, too big to be a shark, too big to be anything I had a name for. The lights steadied and the shape was gone. But I knew it was still there. I could feel it circling just beyond the reach of our light, watching and waiting the same way the thing in the Everglades had watched and waited. Reese started the engine and told us we were leaving. No one argued. We ran back to the marina at full throttle with the lights blazing and the water churning white behind us. We did not speak during the trip. When we reached the dock, the other fishermen paid up and left without looking back. I stayed behind to help Reese tie up the boat. When we were alone, I asked him if he had seen what I had seen. He nodded. He said he had seen it before. He said there were places in the Gulf where things lived that did not belong. Things that had been there since before the water had a name. He said smart captains learned to avoid those places. He said tonight he had forgotten that lesson. He looked at me with eyes that held the same fear I had seen in Harlan's eyes all those years ago, and he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said the things in the water could follow. They could remember. They could track a boat across miles of open ocean if they decided it was worth tracking. He said we needed to leave and not come back for a long time. He said if we were lucky, it would lose interest. He said if we were not lucky, we would find out what happened to the boats that disappeared every year, the ones the Coast Guard never found, the ones that simply vanished between one port and another. I left Cedar Key that night and drove until the sun came up. I have not been back to the Gulf since. Some fears are rational. Some fears keep you alive. And the fear I carry of Florida's waters is both. There are things in the swamps and things in the coastal waters that do not appear in any guidebook or any scientific journal. They exist in the spaces between what we know and what we refuse to believe. They exist because they have always existed, because the land and the water were theirs first. The stories persist because the experiences persist. Every year, someone sees something in the Everglades that they cannot explain. Every year, Bree, a boat disappears off the Gulf Coast without a trace. Every year, the old-timers shake their heads and tell the newcomers to be careful, to watch the water, to respect the places where the world is not quite what it seems. Most newcomers do not listen. They laugh and nod and go where they please, confident that the 21st century has no room for monsters, and most of them come back fine. But some of them do not come back. Some of them disappear, and some of them come back changed. The way Delacroix came back changed. The way Polk came back changed. The way I came back changed. They carry the swamp with them forever after. They carry the knowledge that the world is bigger and stranger and more dangerous than they ever imagined. If you ever go to Florida, stay on the marked trails. Stay in the boat. Stay with your guide. And if the birds go quiet, and the water goes still, and the air turns thick and wrong, turn around and leave, and do not look back. The swamp is watching. The Gulf is watching. And some things, once they see you, never stop looking. The coastal waters are no safer. I learned that the hard way on a trip to the Gulf side, near Cedar Key, 3 years after my return to the Everglades. A friend of a friend had a fishing charter and offered me a spot on a night run for grouper. I should have known better. I should have remembered what Harlan told me about the water, knowing you, remembering you, calling you back. But I went anyway, because part of me still needed to understand, still needed to see more, still hoped that what I had witnessed was an exception rather than a rule. The Gulf taught me otherwise. We launched at dusk from a marina that smelled of diesel and baitfish. The boat was a 30-footer with twin outboards and enough lights to turn night into day. Our captain was a man named Reese who had been running charters for 20 years. He knew the reefs and the wrecks and the places where the big fish gathered. He promised us a good night. We ran out past the oyster bars and the grass flats into the deeper water where the Gulf turned dark blue and then black. The lights on the boat made a small island of brightness in an ocean of nothing. We dropped lines and waited. The fish came slow at first, then faster, then not at all. Reese frowned and checked his electronics and moved us to a different spot. Same thing. A few bites, then silence. He moved us again. Nothing. The other fishermen grumbled and opened more beers and made jokes about the one that got away. I watched the water and said nothing. Something felt wrong. The Gulf was too quiet. The waves were too flat. The darkness beyond the lights was too complete. I had felt this before. I knew what it meant. Reese decided to try one more spot. A wreck site he had been saving for a last resort. He said the fish there were always hungry, but the currents were tricky. Tonight, he made an exception. We motored for 20 minutes until the electronics showed the wreck below us, a jumble of metal and wood that had been someone's boat 50 years ago. We dropped lines. The water around us went still. The engine idled. The lights hummed. And from somewhere beneath us, something moved. I felt it first as a vibration through the hull. A low thrum that was not the engine and not the waves. The other fishermen felt it too. They looked at each other and at Reese and at the water. The thrum grew stronger. The boat began to rock, gently at first, then harder. Reese killed the engine and told everyone to hold on. The rocking stopped. The water went flat. Then the lights flickered. They had been running fine all night. Now they flickered and dimmed and flickered again. In the moments of darkness between flickers, I saw something in the water beside the boat. A shape. Long and dark and moving parallel to our hull. It was too big to be a fish, too big to be a shark, too big to be anything I had a name for. The light steadied, and the shape was gone. But I knew it was still there. I could feel it circling, just beyond the reach of our light. Watching and waiting the same way, the thing in the Everglades had watched and waited. Reese started the engine and told us we were leaving. No one argued. We ran back to the marina at full throttle, with the lights blazing and the water churning white behind us. We did not speak during the trip. When we reached the dock, the other fishermen paid up and left without looking back. I stayed behind to help Reese tie up the boat. When we were alone, I asked him if he had seen what I had seen. He nodded. He said he had seen it before. He said there were places in the Gulf where things lived that did not belong. Things that had been there since before the water had a name. He said, smart captains learn to avoid those places. He said tonight He had forgotten that lesson. He looked at me with eyes that held the same fear I had seen in Harlan's eyes all those years ago, and he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said the things in the water could follow. They could remember. They could track a boat across miles of open ocean if they decided it was worth tracking. He said we needed to leave and not come back for a long time. He said if we were lucky, it would lose interest. He said if we were not lucky, we would find out what happened to the boats that disappeared every year, the ones the Coast Guard never found, the ones that simply vanished between one port and another. I left Cedar Key that night and drove until the sun came up. I told myself I was done with Florida waters. I told myself I had learned my lesson. But the truth is more complicated than that. The truth is that once you have seen what lives in those places, you cannot unsee it. It becomes part of you. It colors every body of water you ever look at again. Every lake, every river, every stretch of coastline carries the question now. What else is down there? What else is watching? The months after Cedar Key were difficult in ways I had not anticipated. I could not sleep without seeing water. I could not close my eyes without feeling that slow circling presence beneath the boat. The shape I had glimpsed in those flickering moments of darkness had burned itself into my memory with a clarity that time refused to soften. I tried to describe it to a friend once, a man I trusted with most of my secrets. I told him about the length of it, the way it moved without displacing water, the sense of intelligence behind its movements. He listened politely and then changed the subject. I never mentioned it again to anyone who had not seen such things themselves. I started collecting accounts from others who had experienced the waters of Florida and come away changed. There were more than I expected. Fishermen who had pulled in lines that bore teeth marks too large for any known species, divers who had felt something brush against them in the murky depths and surface to fine scratches they could not explain, kayakers who had paddled into mangrove tunnels and heard breathing that was not their own, boaters who had seen shapes in the water that defied classification. None of these people spoke publicly about what they had witnessed. None of them wanted to be called crazy or attention-seeking or delusional. They shared their stories only with others who had earned their trust, others who carried similar knowledge and similar fear. One account stayed with me more than the others. It came from a woman named Margaret who had lived on a houseboat in the Florida Keys for 15 years. She was 70 when I met her, sharp-eyed and steady-handed, with no patience for nonsense or exaggeration. She told me about a night in 1989 when something had climbed onto her boat while she slept. She had woken to the sound of weight shifting on the deck, a slow, deliberate movement that was not the rocking of waves or the settling of the hull. She had lain in her bunk with her heart pounding, listening to whatever was out there move from bow to stern and back again. When she finally gathered the courage to look through her window, she saw a shape crouched near the railing, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was too tall to be a man, and too wrong in its proportions to be any animal she knew. It sat there for what felt like hours, motionless, facing the water, as if waiting for something. When dawn came, it slipped over the side without a splash and disappeared beneath the surface. Margaret found wet prints on her deck that morning, prints that looked almost like feet, but were too long and too narrow and had too many joints. She scrubbed them away before anyone else could see them. She never told her neighbors. She never reported it to anyone. She simply lived with the knowledge and the fear and the certainty that something in the water knew where she lived. The years passed, and I tried to build a normal life. I moved inland, took a job that kept me away from the water, married a woman who had never been south of Georgia and did not understand my fear of the coast. I told her I had bad memories of Florida. I told her I had lost family there. Both were true in their way. I had lost Harlan. I had lost the version of myself that believed the world was simple and explainable. I had lost the ability to look at a calm surface and see only water. My wife wanted to vacation in the Keys. She had seen pictures of the clear water and the coral reefs and the sunset cruises that promised romance and relaxation. She did not understand why I refused. She thought I was being stubborn, or strange, or difficult. She could not know what I knew. She could not feel what I felt every time I imagined stepping onto a boat in Florida waters. The fear was not rational in the way she understood rationality. It was deeper than that. It was cellular. It was survival instinct refined by experience into something that could not be argued away. We compromised on the Panhandle. The beaches there were different from the Everglades and the Keys. White sand instead of mangroves, clear green water instead of black, tourists instead of guides, and fishermen who knew what lurked in the deep channels. I told myself it would be safe. I told myself the things I had seen were hundreds of miles away, in different water and different ecosystems. I almost believed it. We stayed at a resort near Destin. The beach stretched wide and flat, crowded with families and couples and college students on break. The water was warm and shallow for 100 yards out. Children splashed and laughed. Parents dozed under umbrellas. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. For 2 days, I let myself relax. I let myself believe that maybe the fear had been exaggerated, that maybe time had distorted my memories into something larger and darker than reality. On the second night, I walked the beach alone after my wife had gone to sleep. The resort lights faded behind me as I moved toward the darker stretch of sand where the public access ended, and the dunes rose high and wild. The Gulf lay flat in silver under the moon, calm as glass, beautiful in a way that almost made me forget why I feared it. I stood at the edge of the water and let the foam wash over my feet. The water was warm. The sand was soft. The night was peaceful in a way that felt like a gift. Then I saw the lights, far out in the Gulf, beyond the sandbar, beyond the buoys that marked the swimming area. Something was glowing beneath the surface, not the green glow of bioluminescence that I had seen in other waters. This was different, yellowish, steady, moving in a slow pattern that circled and returned to center. I watched it for several minutes, trying to convince myself it was a boat or a diver or some natural phenomenon I did not understand, but the movement was too deliberate. The pattern was too regular, and as I watched, the lights began to drift closer to shore. I backed away from the water and returned to the resort without running. I did not want to attract attention. I did not want to explain why a grown man was fleeing from the beach in the middle of the night. But my heart was pounding and my hands were shaking, and I knew, with the certainty that comes from experience, that something in the Gulf had noticed me standing at the water's edge. Something had seen me there, alone and vulnerable, and had begun to move toward me with the same patient purpose I had witnessed in the Everglades and at Cedar Key. I did not sleep that night. I sat in a chair by the window and watched the beach until dawn, half expecting to see a shape emerge from the water and walk toward the resort. Nothing came. Nothing ever came that I could see, but I felt watched for the rest of our stay, and I could not shake the sense that my presence on that beach had registered somewhere in the deep. On the third day, we took a boat tour to see the dolphins. It was a catamaran with a canopy and cold drinks and a captain who made jokes about tourists and pointed out the wildlife with practiced enthusiasm. My wife loved it. She stood at the rail with her phone out, taking pictures of the dolphins that surfaced alongside us, their bodies arcing through the water with a grace that made the other passengers gasp and clap. I stood beside her and tried to share her joy, but my eyes kept drifting to the deeper water beyond the dolphins. My ears kept straining for sounds beneath the engine and the chatter. My skin kept prickling with the sense that something was watching from below. The dolphins left us near a sandbar where the captain dropped anchor and let the passengers swim. The water there was chest deep and crystal clear. You could see your feet on the bottom. You could see the small fish darting between the ripples. My wife waded in and called for me to join her. I stood on the deck and watched. I could not make myself step off the boat. She laughed and splashed water toward me and called me a coward. She did not know how right she was. The captain noticed my hesitation. He came to stand beside me at the rail and offered me a beer from the cooler. He was an older man, weathered by sun and salt, with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life on the water. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just not much of a swimmer. He nodded and did not press, but something in his eyes told me he had seen reluctance like mine before. Something in his posture said he understood that some fears came from experience rather than imagination. He told me about a night 3 years earlier when he had been running a late charter back from an offshore reef. The weather had been calm, the water flat, the sky full of stars. Everything had been perfect until it was not. He said the boat had started to drag like something was holding the stern. He had checked the prop and the rudder and found nothing. The drag continued, then stopped, then started again, harder. He said the boat had slowed to a crawl despite the engines running full. He said he had looked over the stern and seen something attached to the hull. Something large and dark and covered in what looked like barnacles but moved like flesh. He said it had let go when he hit it with a gaff, and the boat had lurched forward so hard he nearly fell overboard. He said he had not seen what it was clearly, but he had seen enough to know it was not a fish and not a mammal and not anything that belonged in the waters where tourists swam. I asked him why he still worked the water if he had seen such things. He shrugged and said a man had to make a living. He said the things in the Gulf did not come around often. He said if you stayed in the shallow areas and kept to the daylight hours and did not go looking for trouble, you could work a lifetime without seeing them more than once or twice. He said the trick was knowing when to leave and having the sense to do it. He looked at me then, really looked, and asked if I had seen something too. I told him I had. I told him about the Everglades and the Cedar Key trip and the shape that had circled our boat in the dark. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said I was smart to stay on the deck. He said some people never learned. He said some people went back to the water again and again, looking for answers, looking for proof, looking for something that would make sense of what they had experienced. He said those people usually found what they were looking for. He said they usually wished they had not. That night, I dreamed of the water again, black water stretching endless beneath a sky without stars. I floated on my back and felt the current pulling me towards something I could not see. The water was warm at first, then cold, then warm again in patches that moved beneath me like breath. I tried to swim, but my arms would not respond. I tried to kick, but my legs felt weighted. I sank slowly, inch by inch, the surface receding above me as the darkness closed in from below. Something touched my foot. Something wrapped around my ankle. Something pulled. I woke gasping. My wife shaking my shoulder, her face creased with worry. I told her it was nothing. I told her I was fine. I did not tell her that I could still feel the pressure around my ankle, cold and tight, like something had followed me out of the dream. The dream repeated for 3 nights in a row, each time more vivid than the last. In the final version, I sank all the way to the bottom. The sand there was cold and dark and covered in shapes I could not identify. They lay scattered across the sea floor like sleeping bodies, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all facing upward with their eyes open and their mouths slack. I recognized some of the faces. Harlan was there, his features bloated but unmistakable. The Jacksonville men were there, arranged in a neat row near a ridge of coral. Others I did not know. Fishermen and tourists and swimmers who had gone into Florida waters, and never come back. They lay together in the darkness. And as I drifted down to join them, I saw that they were not alone. Something moved among them, something vast and slow that tended to the bodies like a gardener tending flowers. I could not see it clearly. I could only sense its presence, the weight of its attention, the patient intelligence behind its movements. It noticed me watching. It turned toward me, and I woke screaming, my wife holding me, the dawn light just beginning to brighten the windows. We left the Panhandle the next day. My wife was disappointed, but did not argue. She could see that something had changed in me, that the vacation had triggered something she did not understand. We drove north in silence, the Gulf falling away behind us, the landscape shifting from sand and palms to pine and clay. By the time we crossed the state line, I felt the pressure in my chest begin to ease. By the time we reached home, I could breathe again without effort. I did not tell my wife the full truth for another year. When I finally did, sitting at our kitchen table on a night when the rain fell hard and the windows streamed with water, she listened without interrupting. She did not laugh. She did not dismiss what I had told her. She simply sat with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup and her eyes on my face, taking in every word like she was memorizing them for later. When I finished, she asked only one question. She asked if I believed the things I had seen were real. I told her I did. I told her I had spent decades trying to convince myself otherwise and had failed. She nodded and reached across the table and took my hand. She said she believed me. She said she did not understand it and could not explain it, but she believed that I had seen what I said I had seen. That moment of acceptance meant more to me than any proof or evidence ever could. It meant I was no longer alone with the knowledge. It meant someone else knew, even if they had not witnessed it themselves. She asked me once, years later, what I thought the creatures were. I had no good answer for her. I still do not. I have read the theories and the speculation and the folklore that has accumulated around the Florida cryptids over the decades. Some say they are undiscovered species, evolutionary holdovers from an age when the swamps covered more of the continent. Some say they are something older, beings that predate the categories we use to understand the natural world. Some say they are not creatures at all in the biological sense, but something else entirely, manifestations of the land itself, spirits or guardians or forces that have no equivalent in our understanding of reality. I do not know which theory is correct. I am not sure any of them are. I only know what I experienced, and what I experienced does not fit neatly into any framework that makes sense. The stories I carry are not unique. That is the part that haunts me most. The things I saw in Florida are seen by others every year. Fishermen and guides and tourists and researchers, all of them coming back with tales that echo the ones I have told. The skunk ape in the Everglades, the creatures in the Gulf that attach to boats and drag them down, the shapes that move through the black water of the interior swamps, watching, waiting, patient beyond human understanding. The official explanations never satisfy. Misidentified wildlife, hoaxes, hallucinations brought on by heat and fear. The people who offer these explanations have never stood in a clearing where the world went silent. They have never felt the weight of something watching from the cypress. They have never seen their captain's face go white as something impossible rose from the deep. I am old now. My wife passed 3 years ago, and I live alone in a house far from any coast. I do not travel to Florida anymore. I do not travel anywhere the water runs deep and dark. I stay in my small town with my small routines and my memories that refuse to fade. Sometimes, on nights when the rain falls hard and the wind pushes against the windows, I think about Harlan. I think about the way he aged after that night with the Jacksonville men. I think about the tremor in his hands and the wideness in his eyes, and the warning he gave me at the bus station. He told me the swamp had noticed me. He told me it never stopped watching once it did. I have spent my life wondering if he was right. I have spent my life feeling eyes on my back when I stand near water, any water, even a pond or a creek or a drainage ditch after a storm. The fear has become part of me. It is woven into my bones and my breath and my dreams that still take me back to black water and things that should not exist. There is a creek behind my house. It runs shallow most of the year, barely enough water to wet your ankles, but after heavy rains, it swells and deepens and takes on a color that reminds me too much of the channels near Chokolosky. I avoid it during those times. I stay inside and watch through the window and wait for the water to recede. Once, during a storm that lasted 3 days, I saw something in that creek. It was small compared to what I had witnessed in Florida, but it moved the same way. Deliberate, patient, aware. It passed beneath my window and disappeared downstream, and I sat in my chair with my heart pounding for hours afterward. The things in the water are not limited to Florida. They are everywhere the water goes. They follow the rivers and the aquifers and the underground channels that connect one body of water to another. They are patient enough to wait and mobile enough to travel and intelligent enough to remember the people who have seen them. If you are reading this, you have a choice that I did not have. You can close this account and forget what I have told you. You can dismiss it as fiction or fantasy or the ramblings of an old man who spent too long in the sun. You can book your trip to the Everglades or the Keys or the Gulf Coast and enjoy the water without fear. Most people do. Most people see nothing stranger than an alligator or a manatee. Most people come home with photographs and memories and stories about wildlife that fit neatly into the world as they understand it. But some people see more. Some people push too deep into the swamp or stay too late on the water or go looking for the places where the guides will not take them. Those people find what I found. Those people carry the weight of that knowledge for the rest of their lives. They become members of a community that has no meetings or membership cards or official recognition. They become people who know, and knowing changes everything. The Everglades covers over 1 million acres. The Gulf of Mexico stretches for 600,000 square miles. The coastline of Florida runs for over 8,000 miles, if you count every inlet and bay and barrier island. In all that space, in all that water, there is room for things we have not cataloged. There is room for creatures that have learned to avoid our boats and our nets and our cameras. There is room for entire ecosystems that operate beyond our awareness, in the deep channels and the hidden clearings, and the places where the water goes black and the air goes still. I have seen the edges of those places. I have glimpsed what lives there, and I am telling you now, with all the weight of my experience and all the certainty of my fear, that the things in Florida's waters are real. They are patient. They are watching. And if you go looking for them, they will find you before you find them. Harlan was right about everything. The swamp noticed me that summer in 1973, and it has never stopped watching. Every body of water I have encountered since then has carried the same question in its depths. What is down there? What is waiting? I have lived my life avoiding the answer. I have lived my life running from the knowledge that the world is not what we pretend it is. But running does not change the truth. The truth waits in the black water and the still air and the silence that falls when something old and impossible draws near. The truth is that we share this world with things we cannot explain, things we cannot fight, things we can only hope to avoid. And the truth is that Florida, with all its beauty and all its sunshine and all its promises of paradise, is one of the places where those things live closest to the surface. I will die soon. My body is failing. the way bodies do when they have carried too much for too long. When I close my eyes for the final time, I know what I will see. I will see black water stretching endless. I will see sawgrass bending in a wind that makes no sound. I will see a shape standing in the shallows, tall and patient, and waiting for me to drift close enough to touch. I'm not afraid of that vision anymore. I have lived with it for too long to fear it now. I only hope that when the moment comes, when I finally meet whatever has been watching me all these years, it will be quick. I hope it will be merciful. I hope that the things in the swamp are not as cruel as my nightmares have made them seem. But I do not count on hope. Hope is for people who have not seen what I have seen. Hope is for people who still believe that the world follows rules they understand. I lost that belief 50 years ago, standing on a dock in Chokoloskee, watching my uncle come back from the swamp with empty seats and haunted eyes. I've spent every day since then carrying the knowledge he gave me, the knowledge that the Everglades and the Gulf and all the dark waters of Florida hold secrets that are not meant for human minds. The swamp things are real, the coastal terrors are real, and somewhere right now, as you read these words, something is standing in the shallows of a cypress clearing, watching a boat drift too close, waiting with the patience of something that has all the time in the world. Stay on the marked trails, stay in the shallow water. Listen to the guides who tell you not to go further. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the birds have gone silent and the air has gone thick and wrong, turn around and run, and do not look back. Some things are not meant to be seen, some places are not meant for people, and some waters, once they notice you, never let you go. The swamp is watching, the Gulf is watching, and now perhaps so are you.